stakeholder session. This morning we'll be covering cargo handling equipment and ground support equipment, and then we'll have another session this afternoon beginning at 1 o'clock. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Monica, can you see the agenda?
Yes.
So we'll start off this morning with me giving a presentation on the ground rules for discussion and some context for how we got here. And then Melissa Evanego, my colleague, is going to spend the bulk of the morning giving a presentation on some of the strategies that we're considering to reduce emissions from cargo handling equipment and ground support equipment. We'll have an interactive discussion after each of her technical presentations. And I also wanted to flag for you that this session is being recorded as of about a minute or two ago. The recording and all of the presentations that we're using today will be posted on the NJPACT website within the next day or two, so you can go back and reference them at your leisure. You'll note also on the agenda that we are anticipating ending at 11:30 instead of 12:30. If we need more time, we can certainly go until 12:30, but we were thinking that 2 hours for discussion might be sufficient. So let me go ahead and switch over to my presentation. Okay, DEP staff, can you see my screen? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
I can't see your faces, so can someone say yes or no, please?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes.
Jeff, can you see the presentation? And can you hear me?
I can hear you and I can see it, but you're still just in a normal screen. If you hit Alt F5, you will go into presentation mode.
I cannot hear anyone, so let's just pause for a second. Melissa, Monica, Jeff, can you hear me and see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
you can. Okay.
Yes.
You're not hearing us?
Okay.
I think Peg's not hearing anybody.
So I wanted to say two things at the outset before we start the formal presentation. One, I wanted to apologize because I know we had some problems with the invitations going out. We were using a dedicated email box for this rulemaking, and we were hearing that the emails, for whatever reason, were not getting to the intended recipients. So we resent everything using my assistant's personal email account for DEP. So we're hoping that those all went through better the second time. Again, I apologize if there were people that were expecting to receive it and didn't for whatever reason. The recording will be posted on the website, and I'm happy to talk with any stakeholder after this session if you weren't able to attend. I also wanted to make it clear that these are preliminary concepts that we are exploring. We are in no way committed to moving forward with any of these strategies after today. So with that, let's kick off. Let me put this in slideshow mode. Okay. So we're here today to talk about reducing CO2 and short-lived climate pollutants as part of our NJPACT initiative, which is New Jersey Protecting Against Climate Threats. As I said, the recording has already started. It will be made available on the NJPACT website along with all of the PowerPoints. Comments that are submitted by the deadline will also be uploaded to the website and will be available after the end of the comment period. Everyone is muted while we are speaking, while we are giving the technical presentations. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand or type your question in the chat box. to raise your hand, you should see a toolbox around the center of your screen, and there's an icon that looks like a hand. Just click on that when you want to ask your question. We'll call on you in the order that the hands were raised, to the best that we can tell who raised their hands first. When you have finished asking your question, if you could click it again, that will lower your hand, or we will do that for you. You can also type your questions in the chat box, and we will have a moderator going through the chat box as well and alternating between people that raise their hands and people that are typing their questions. When we call on you, you can unmute yourself. If you are calling in only, if you're using the dial-in number and you are not online, you can press *6 to mute yourself and *6 again to unmute yourself. We also have a technical person moderating the chat box, so if you're having technical difficulties, go ahead and type that question in the chat box as well, and we'll do our best to help you. So let's give a little bit of context for how we got here. New Jersey's Energy Master Plan was released in January 2020, and it establishes a very broad framework for meeting the governor's clean energy and climate goals, which is 100% clean energy by 2050, including widespread electrification of the transportation sector. The Energy Master Plan focuses on all sectors and lays out a pathway to reduce emissions from all of those sectors by 2050. Around the same time, in January 2020, the governor issued Executive Order 100, which put a little more meat on the bones. It directed DEP to take regulatory actions to reduce CO2 and short-lived climate pollutants. It also directed us to establish a greenhouse gas monitoring and reporting rule, which is already underway. We held initial stakeholdering back in February. Ken Ratzman led that effort, and it focused solely on stationary sources, electric generating units and non-electric generating units. We received significant comments during that stakeholdering session, as well as during the comment period that followed. Some of the main things we heard are that our potential strategies should not be so narrowly focused on existing stationary sources. We need to expand it, and specifically for this audience, we needed to include transportation, the transportation sector, and also look at climate pollutants other than CO2, such as the short-lived climate pollutants and black carbon. In response to those comments that we received, we started on a second round of stakeholdering on September 3rd. The September 3rd stakeholdering expanded the scope of the potential stationary source strategies that we were interested in considering. And then we are holding 2 rounds of stakeholdering for the transportation sector. So September 10th, last week, we had a full day where we covered California's suite of clean truck rules that ranged from the advanced clean truck rule to the low NOx omnibus rule to the zero emission fleet rule. We also talked about strategies for drayage trucks and pulling medium-duty vehicles into the statewide inspection program. Today, we're talking about cargo handling equipment and ground support equipment in the morning. And then this afternoon, we'll be talking about ocean-going vessels and hovercraft. As I said, the Energy Master Plan looked at all emissions, all sectors and all fuel sources. And it concluded that we needed to take steps for all of the sectors and all of the fuel sources in order to reduce the goal of 100, in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% from the 2006 baseline by 2050. This would also achieve the governor's goal of 100% clean energy by 2050. As I said, this is the focus of today's meeting: cargo handling equipment and ground support equipment in the morning. So let's talk a little more about the specific pollutants that we're concerned about. When we look at the greenhouse gas inventory for New Jersey, we see that transportation is by far the biggest contributor to the emissions pie in New Jersey. Not only that, we need to keep in mind the NOx and PM 2.5 emissions that come from the transportation sector. I think you all know that NOx is an ozone precursor, and PM 2.5 has significant impacts, especially in our urban areas. For NOx, you can see that the majority of NOx is coming from the mobile source sector. And for PM 2.5, we have about a quarter of the emissions coming from the transportation sector. I think you've all heard DEP say this, but it bears repeating. The last bullet in particular is one that I like to highlight because I think it reinforces the need to take additional steps to reduce emissions from transportation. We know when we look at the national air toxics data for New Jersey, it shows that diesel emissions pose a higher cancer risk than any other toxic emitted in New Jersey. To me, that's a call for action and a reason to do more. We also know that when we work on getting a low carbon transportation sector, that will provide specific benefits to our EJ communities. We also know that the data shows that black carbon is an important climate pollutant, and there will be direct health savings as a result of avoided health outcomes from reducing black carbon. One of the assumptions that was built into the modeling associated with the Energy Master Plan is that 75% of the medium duty fleet and 50% of the heavy duty fleet must be electric by 2050. This was in large part why we held the stakeholdering meeting last week to look at some of California's strategies to electrify that sector. As I said, the Energy Master Plan has a suite of strategies. The first chapter is devoted to transportation strategies. And if you had a chance to look at it, you'll see that the strategies that are envisioned in the Energy Master Plan range from reducing vehicle miles traveled to connecting people to public transportation, walkable communities, and electrification. In addition to the strategies that we're exploring through NJPACT, I just wanted everyone to be aware that we have several other initiatives going on in parallel. First, I was pleased that our governor signed a multi-state MOU that builds off the MOU that we signed in 2013. So this particular MOU focuses on the medium and heavy duty trucking sector. It calls for an interim goal of 30% of new truck and bus sales to be electric by 2030, culminating in 100% of sales being electric by 2050. We will be conducting stakeholdering for this as well and developing an action plan that will be released in the spring. So look forward to additional emails and invites so that we can get your input on this MOU as well, on the action plan. There were 15 states and jurisdictions that signed this MOU. I like this map because it shows that it's not just the Northeast states. We also have a swath of the West Coast states, and then Colorado and Hawaii signing on to participate with us in this effort to try to get the medium and heavy duty sector moved towards zero carbon. We also are dedicating nearly all available funding sources to reducing emissions from transportation. The Volkswagen settlement, which has been highly publicized, is comprised of $72.2 million, all of which will be dedicated towards transportation electrification. The second solicitation just closed. We received over $100 million worth of proposals for about $37 million worth of remaining funding. All of the projects, like I said, will be transportation electrification focused in EJ areas. And they will cover everything from ground support equipment to bus and school bus and transit bus electrification. We also have settlement money, including Fiat and Bosch, but there are others that we are also channeling towards transportation electrification and the associated EV charging infrastructure that's needed for that. Finally, the RGGI Strategic Funding Plan was released not too long ago after a long set of stakeholder sessions. That strategic funding plan directs DEP to spend its proceeds on transportation electrification as well as e-mobility, which means making sure that residents of urban communities have access to clean transportation, whether it's through electric taxis, electric ride sharing, electric ride hailing, or things like that. BPU and EDA will also be dedicating their share of the proceeds towards transportation electrification. And you can find out more details about that in the actual strategic funding plan. And you can also look forward to more information on that coming out in the coming months. I think this is the final slide now. The EV law, which was signed in January. January was a very busy month. Set out a suite of goals for primarily the light duty sector to try to reach the goal of 330,000 electric vehicles on the road by 2025, directing state agencies to lead by example by electrifying 25% of their fleet by 2025, and that goal increases by 2035, and also required us to establish goals to electrify the transportation sector. Yep, so that is my last slide. So I've stopped sharing. Next up is Melissa Evanego. So Melissa, can you share your screen and unmute yourself?
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
No.
Can
Now
you
we
see it
can.
now?
Yes.
Okay, good.
See it.
Okay, let me just raise my volume.
Okay, we can see your screen. I can't hear you though.
I can hear you, Melissa. I think it's
You can?
Peg.
Okay. Oh, technical difficulties. Okay. All right. So if everybody can hear me, I'll start. So good morning. Thanks for joining us today. I think this is an exciting topic. I'm really interested in learning more about cargo handling equipment and airport ground support equipment. I'm really looking forward to the feedback that we'll get from all of you that's on the phone or through written comments. So we know that there's many ways to get emission benefits from this sector. What we're really looking for from all of you is what is the best way to go about getting those emission benefits? So let me slide through here. Okay. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of the emissions from cargo handling equipment to give some perspective on this category. I'll discuss cargo handling equipment as it pertains to the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey because they have a really great inventory, and that's a really good starting point for us. We know that there are other ports in the state, but they don't have the comprehensive inventory for us to present. Then I'll discuss what CARB is doing in this arena, and then I'll kind of repeat the dialogue, but focus on airport ground support equipment. And then I'll end the presentation by going over some ideas that the department is thinking about on how to reduce emissions from this sector. And then I'll look to you. I'll pose some questions, and I'll really be looking for some informational dialogue back and forth, so you can maybe educate us on what you think would be best next steps. Again, like Peg said, you know, there's nothing set in stone. We're looking for ideas, and we're really trying to work collaboratively to move to the next step on what is what would make the most sense moving forward in this area. Okay, I just want to repeat why we're looking at cargo handling equipment. When we look at the emissions coming from the ports, there's a lot of focus on the trucks that drive through the neighborhoods all day. So while that definitely is a concern, and it's something that we're focused on, which is why we did some stakeholdering last week on the trucks, cargo handling equipment is important. It's, these pieces of equipment stay at the port. They work all day long. And the emissions from this equipment really affect the residents, but also the workers at the port. So these are sources of emissions that are less visible to the residents, but the equipment remains there within the fence line. So we shouldn't forget about it. So for purposes of New Jersey's emission, cargo handling equipment is classified as a non-road source. You can see from the various pie charts here, the non-road sector is either the largest or the second largest piece of the pie for the different pollutants. Non-road diesel equipment operates way longer than what we would consider its useful life of, say, 10 to 15 years. Through many of our voluntary grant programs over the years, we've either retrofitted, repowered, or replaced this equipment. And many of this equipment, the average life can be anywhere from 20 to 50 years. So way longer than its useful life. And this is why it's a concern. We need to modernize this sector of the fleet. You also see that when we look at the carbon monoxide inventory, non-road emissions are the majority of this pie chart. And so while carbon monoxide is not directly related to greenhouse gases, it is an indirect contributor. Therefore, electrification options really need to be considered. So I like visuals. Here's a slide that will give you an idea of some of the cargo handling equipment that's most widely used at ports. So we'll be talking about yard tractors. They also go by yard hustlers, jockey trucks. There's a lot of number of names for them. Then there's a couple different kind of cranes that happen that operate at the port, and a lot of different pieces of equipment that move the containers around. So CARB has some existing regulations. They had new and in-use requirements going back to the original regulations in 2005. The requirements were for all diesel-fueled equipment used at the port or an intermodal rail yard, anything that lifts containers, bulk, or liquid cargo. So you can see they started their phase-in 2007, and everything had to be compliant by 2017. So moving on, CARB is now considering amending the regulations to transition all cargo handling equipment to zero emissions. They're considering mobile equipment at the ports and rail yards, and through some discussions that we've had with them, they're considering warehouses as well. They expect these to be phased-in requirements, and it will be for the equipment and for the infrastructure. So hopefully compliance will begin in 2026 and should be completed by 2031. So moving on and looking at these pie charts that we took from the Port Authority's annual emissions inventory. When we look at the cargo handling piece, it may not be the largest piece, but it's certainly, like I said, for reasons that I said before, it's really important. It's the public health. It's these pieces of equipment stay for a really long time. Again, I want to thank the Port Authority for having a great inventory that we can look at to give us an idea of, just the landscape of the different pieces of equipment that operate at the port. And the Port Authority has the ability to do that ground up inventory, which really gets at each of these sectors at the marine terminals. Let's see. All right. And then again, all of these PACT rulemakings that we're focused on greenhouse gases. We know that diesel equipment lasts a really long time, and the cargo handling equipment is readily, there's a lot of options for electrification in this sector. We know that there are forklifts and some of gantry cranes. There's a lot of movement to electrification. Particularly, we know that the yard hustlers, that there's been some success with those pieces of equipment. So when we look at the Port Authority inventory and we dive a little bit deeper, you can see the counts of this equipment. So this is what Port Authority considers their primary equipment. You can see the terminal tractors are the largest type of port equipment. So again, terminal tractors could be yard hustlers, they could be jockey trucks. These are the pieces of equipment that move containers and different goods around the port. We've heard really good things about electrification in this sector. Peg mentioned that we had VW settlement funds. So we did allocate funds for our first round to some electric pieces of equipment. So we're really excited that there were a number of different manufacturers that had offerings in this space. So we're really excited to see, when this equipment comes here and to get some real-time information here on the East Coast about those pieces of equipment. We've also heard really good things about electric forklifts. Again, same like the tractors, there's a lot of different offerings from different manufacturers. So again, I just want to remind everybody that this is just counts from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. There's other ports in the state. I can imagine that, their numbers may be lower because they're smaller ports, but we would see the same types of equipment. When we look at this inventory, especially line 2 on the equipment, the straddle carriers, we can see that there's a large number of them at the Port Authority, and we can see that their emissions are quite high because they have large usage hours. Due to the cost and the size of this equipment, we probably need an interim strategy to get us to electric. And that's the type of thing that we're looking for feedback. This is a big category with big emissions. How do we handle them? And I don't think, that we're looking for a one-size-fits-all approach. And this is really where we need your help. So I'm going to pause right there and see if there's any questions about cargo handling equipment. I'm not, further on in my presentation, I'm going to talk about, the feedback that we're looking for, but does anybody have any comments at this point that they might want to add about cargo handling equipment, specifically about emissions inventories, the types of equipment? Is there something that I missed? If not, then I'll move on to airport ground support equipment.
John Atkins, you can unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment.
Thanks. This is quite an extensive list, but what it looks like what is not on this list is equipment that is already electrified that handles container handling equipment. Was that data gathered, or was there just not a collection?
I believe that part of the inventory, there are 78 pieces of equipment, of the primary equipment at the port, that are electrified already.
Okay. Yeah, because this shows, what has not to this point, but I think what we also need to look at is how much, has been electrified and how much progress has been made on this front already.
Right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Melissa, I don't see any more hands
Okay.
raised, so if you wanted to continue, you can.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about airport ground support equipment. Again, here are some visuals to give you some context of what we're talking about. So we're talking about loaders or tractors. The tractors are the pieces of equipment that move the planes to the runway. We have all the food service trucks and the baggage tugs. So again, one of the issues here is there's a lot of general terms like aircraft tractor, which could have many different uses, and each of those uses could mean something very different for modernizing that fleet. So CARB is considering at the end of this year looking at regulations to transition all their airport ground support equipment to zero emissions. So just like the cargo handling equipment, they're looking to start compliance somewhere around the 2023 timeframe with complete compliance in 2032. That again is for new equipment and infrastructure. Once again, turning to the Port Authority, the Aviation Department was kind enough to share some numbers at the Port Authority of what they have as in regards to cargo handling, in regards to ground support equipment. So this is numbers for equipment just at Newark Liberty International, and we can see some estimates of the primary types of equipment there. The Port Authority also assembles an annual greenhouse gas inventory. So I pulled those emissions, I put them in the little box at the bottom of this slide. We look at the numbers and the emissions are quite large. There's a lot of pieces of equipment that are running, 24/7. Obviously in these COVID times, I'm sure the numbers are a little bit lower, but still, this equipment lasts a really long time, much longer than its average useful life. It's definitely equipment that we need to focus on. We've never focused on it before. Thankfully, with the use of some VW funds, we're looking to electrify a number of pieces of airport ground support equipment. So that's a really exciting project that we're looking to learn some really great things about. But again, like the cargo handling equipment, not all of this equipment is ripe for electrification. So how do we get from old equipment now to electrification? What are some solutions? We know that there's a lot of electric options already being used at the airport, as well as other airports within the tri-state area. Okay, so that was my background information. So what is New Jersey considering? We want to prioritize opportunities that we can implement quickly to get immediate emission benefits. We want to focus on the equipment that has benefit to the communities that are most impacted by air pollution. We understand that there's limitations in technology in the different categories for cargo handling equipment and airport ground support equipment. So, do we focus on the phase-in approach? Do we look at Tier 4 diesel until there's viable electrification options or until the infrastructure is in place? There are many legal questions that we still need to dive into as far as, what can we do? How can we proceed? Do we have to limit our scope to just the ports, the rail yards, airports like CARB does? Can we look at distribution centers and bulk terminals? We know that there's a lot of warehouses in the state, and where there's a lot of warehouses, there's a lot of yard tractors and forklifts. So these are all things that we think about when moving forward. So as I conclude and we move to the next part of the meeting, I want to turn it over to you. And here's some of the feedback that we're really looking for. Again, the feedback could be in the form of written comments. The next slide that I'll share with you will have the email address. I just ask that in the subject line you put cargo handling equipment. This way that will help better organize us here as we're receiving lots of comments from all the different stakeholder meetings. So some of the feedback, and this definitely is not everything, but what's the availability of type of tier 4 or hybrid equipment, or even the electric options? If anybody has specific experiences with tier 4 hybrids or electric, please share it with us. It would be good to know what vendors are operating in this space. What is the return on investment with the new technology? What has prevented you from moving to the next step on your own? Is it infrastructure? Is that the barrier to moving forward? Is it the cost? Is it the offerings from the different manufacturers? We know that California has a lot of autonomous vehicles in operation there. Is that something that we should be aware of, that people are moving to here on the East Coast? I'll admit I don't know a lot about those vehicles, so I'm willing to be educated and hear what people have to say about it. So like I said, these are just some of the questions that come to mind. Certainly it's not everything, and we are open to learning and listening to what you have to say. So here is, again, the email that you should be sending comments to. Again, the subject line should be cargo handling equipment. These comments are due by September 30th, so that gives you 2 weeks from today to send in your comments. So that is all I have. Like I said, I'm looking for comments. I'll open it up for discussion for anybody that might have something.
Jane, you can unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment.
Good morning. This is Jane Herndon from Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. I work for Port Authority's aviation department. So I guess my first comment is with regard to your deadline for comments. We were unfortunately one of those groups that didn't get notice of these meetings until last week. So we respectfully request at least a 2-week extension beyond September 30th. I just want to point out some things about the California program, specifically with regard to airport ground support equipment. The California program actually consists of 2 other programs, 2 other regulatory programs, one aimed at non-road diesel equipment, heavy-duty non-road diesel equipment, and one aimed at gasoline non-road heavy-duty equipment. Those 2 programs are fleet emissions averaging programs, and you should check with, I encourage you to check with CARB on the effectiveness of that program in transitioning to zero or low emissions equipment already. So those 2 programs plus the zero emission GSE program that CARB will be advancing later this year, they are supported by a number of 6 cost sharing programs that support the facility owners and the fleet owners in the electrification. And that would include the FAA VAL program, the VW settlements, of course, and 4 programs that are specific to California. I think it's fair to say that transitioning California has recognized that transitioning to electric vehicles requires a lot of economic incentives for the stakeholders, for the people that are affected. So if New Jersey intends to move forward with programs like these from California, you can expect that it would have to come with similar kinds of cost-sharing programs. I had one thing written down here, hold on. On slide 13, you had shown a short abbreviated inventory of ground support equipment at Newark Airport, and you referred to it as equipment that we have, meaning Port Authority. It operates at the airports, but Port Authority doesn't own that equipment. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Jane. You're right.
Yep.
I did see it. That's
And hold on one second. Yeah, I also want to note the regulatory programs that California has been implementing and that they intend to implement. These are extremely complex programs with heavy reporting obligations. It imposes an incredibly heavy burden on the regulatory agency. It imposes a lot of requirements for the agency to provide electronic reporting formats, et cetera. So in going forward with a program like that, NJDEP is going to have to consider availability of its resources to manage, to start up and manage a program like that. It's a DEP budget issue. So Port Authority will have additional comments on this. I just wanted to touch on some of these high-level issues, and also want to again thank you very much for hosting this session and advancing New Jersey's important agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. I think you made some really good points. Like I said, we're just starting to dive into the issues, and yeah, I think really good points. Thank you. So I look forward to your written comments as well.
Okay, Timothy Pohl, you can unmute yourself and make your comment or ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. It's Tim Poley. I'm with Airlines for America, which is a trade association representing the country's large commercial airlines, both passenger and cargo. And it's good to hear a familiar voice in Jane from the Port Authority, who we were working with on the Port Authority's own initiative to look at controlling emissions from ground support equipment. And I also thank you for holding this and giving us some insight into where you might be headed on this. But I do have some questions. The first is with respect to your requests for comments. Like the Port Authority, we also did not receive notice of this until very recently. I'm actually somewhat unclear on exactly what you're requesting comments on. If you could clarify that. And also with respect to that, if you could clarify what direction you're going. Are you thinking that you're going to be proposing something that goes beyond what California has on its books? The Clean Air Act, the Federal Clean Air Act, limits the authority of states, and in this area limits authority to adopting identical regulations to California. So I'm wondering whether you're planning on going beyond what California is proposing. I'm also wondering whether you're planning to coordinate with the Port Authority and their initiatives to control emissions. So those are kind of sets of the main questions that I have about what exactly you're asking comments on and what exactly you're proposing. But before you answer, I just also wanted to mention during your presentation, and thank you for the presentation, I just wanted to point out, you mentioned that ground support equipment, there's a lot that's running 24/7. That is not accurate, and I think it's really important. This is ground support equipment is a very unique area. It's composed of many different types of equipment doing many different types of tasks, and so it is complicated, but it is not accurate to say that there's equipment running 24/7. I also just wanted to point out that the impact of COVID has not just brought emissions down a little bit. At Newark, and Jane would have better information, more timely information on this, but the data that I've seen from Newark indicates that passenger levels are down in the range of 90% year over year through June of this year. And aircraft movements for commercial aircraft are down in the range of 50%. So obviously the equipment serving those aircraft are not operating at pre-COVID levels. We don't really expect a recovery to pre-COVID levels for years. And so I just want you I just want to highlight just how impactful the COVID crisis has been in our sector, and take that into account when you're looking at how to move forward, particularly in light of the financial cost this may impose in this context. So sorry to go on for so long, and again, really appreciate you guys inviting us, but I would like some clarification on what you're seeking comments on, and I also would like to request an extension on comments on the comment period, as we didn't get notification until quite late in this process as well. But thanks again, and I'll just listen from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, for your comments. So, the type of things that we're looking for feedback on are exactly like one of the things that you said, that this equipment is not running 24/7. I could speak for myself and say, I really need to be educated a little bit more on the type of equipment, how it's running, the different types of equipment, how do we bin the equipment, and what is available in technology for Tier 4, for hybrid, or for electrification. We are not looking to go past what California is doing. California is right now considering a number of different things for cargo handling equipment and airport ground support equipment. So we will follow what California is looking to do, and we will see what is feasible to do here in New Jersey, if we can do exactly what California is doing, or do we do something a little bit different. So any comments that you can provide that you feel would be useful for us to learn and to make some decisions moving forward with ground support equipment would be really helpful for us.
Okay, thank you. So again, I just I'm sorry, as a lawyer, I'm a little bit too entrenched in detail sometimes. So, but is there a specific document or set of proposals that you're asking us to comment on, or is it just a general call for input based on the items that you listed in one of your slides.
Yeah, this really is just a very general, informal conversation to say, you know, this is the space that we want to move in. We want to really look at getting emission benefits, you know, from the criteria pollutants and greenhouse gases. So how do we move in that space? What's feasible to do? And we're really looking for help for some solutions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, Charles L., you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Charles Liu. I'm from the Port Authority, the Seaport section. First of all, really thank you and appreciate the opportunity to exchange these information. Really look forward to the collaboration and bumping heads to figure out, you know, what the best solutions may be down the road. Obviously, this is a very complicated issue to solve, and I think, you know, moving forward, we will do our best to try to help and support NJDEP on some of the granularities, things such as you know, diesel equipment and non-road. There's a huge sector that comprises of very different equipment types, and they range from things that seem similar to things that you would not believe how they could or should be grouped into one sector. But we are proud to say that our terminal operators in this region are on a very aggressive replenishing cycle. Most of their equipment are being replaced between 6 to 10 years of usage. This is very different than some of the locomotives or marine applications. So in other words, we know as a fact that most of our tenants definitely do not drive those equipments to death. We can't speak that on behalf of the thousands more operators in the region, which brings to my second point. And the concern is if we decided to regulate or exclude a large sector of these usage, not the same business type, what may end up happening is we could see a lot of these equipments being retired into those areas that are adjacent sometimes to our tenants, which really defeats the purpose and actually exacerbates the true emission benefits that we were hoping to see. So that's definitely a concern that we're really looking into the support from NJDEP. And also the fact is, at the current moment, you know, the port equipment as a whole that are owned and operated by our tenants, we're proud to say that we're about 10% electrified, meaning the largest cranes, many of the new rail-mounted gantry cranes, most of these are electrified, but we're also foreseeing issues down the road as these begin to have a large-scale impact to potential needs of infrastructure upgrades, to brownouts, blackouts, and, you know, those are the things that we would really love to have a conversation with the BPUs and maybe with the utility service companies, because these requires a very long-term planning to even fathom these, you know, not even dozens, but generally speaking, depending on the use, there could be a lot of upgrades that will be needed in very strategic locations throughout the port. And then last but not least, to piggyback a little bit onto what Jane was talking about, the California program. One of the programs that we've been looking into for the longest time is the Carl Moyer program. So California has started this since 1998, which is a level playing field to seek solicitations of projects of all types, obviously including off-road equipment, to compare their cost benefits. And at the moment, they have about $60 million a year in annual allocation on top or as a base, you know, with still having Volkswagen and all the other funding opportunities. But the Carl Moyer program, what it provided the state of California was a really good indicator as to what makes sense in terms of projects that they could sponsor, support, and the you could almost say the sweet spot in terms of the percentage of support that the state government could provide, and also gaining a strategic sneak peek into what technology is forthcoming. And so I think Obviously, the carrot and the stick is going to have to complement each other, but I do think there's a lot of opportunities that we can have looking more into the CARB Moira program to figure out what makes sense for the industry, because obviously, you know, there are many, if not infinite amount of opportunities, but I definitely believe that from a scientific standpoint, we can find the lowest hanging fruit and really make a good progress that will not take too many steps backward, but striving those baby steps in the near future. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. I think you make a lot of good points. You know, we are obviously concerned with if we regulate one sector or one location where that equipment is working, what happens to that oldest, you know, piece of equipment. Does it just move somewhere else in the state? So that definitely is a concern with all strategies that we work on here at DEP. Again, I think the Port Authority for their inventories, while it gives us a really good idea of you know, what each sector looks like for the whole non-road piece of the pie that's located at the port, we do know through various voluntary programs with the state or that you have at the Port Authority, you may have a lot newer equipment than the other ports. So while, you know, the inventory numbers might not look so bad to some, it could look very different if we had a comprehensive inventory at the other ports. So thanks for your points. It's a lot of things that we need to consider.
Thank you.
Okay, Lisa, you can unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment.
Thank you. Good morning. I do have a couple of questions. First, I need to add my name to the chorus of stakeholders who have indicated that they did not receive notice ahead of time of these meetings. I was at the meeting last week for the drayage truck emissions, and unfortunately, I represent the motor carriers who pull the freight from the Port of New York, New Jersey, and yet I was not notified of that meeting or did not receive an invitation and only found out about it just hours beforehand. So I would, and our comment period is shorter. Our comments are due by September 24th. So while you are looking and making an assessment of perhaps extending the comment period as has been requested by others, I would ask you respectfully to consider extending that period, especially given that we do have some holidays coming up, Jewish holidays coming up that make it difficult for folks to get things done that fast, especially with so little notice. So please consider giving us an extension. The other thing I wanted to ask is more of a question of, this is my second or third meeting that I've been in now for this, and I haven't heard anybody talk about the impact of NEEs and what you're looking at in terms of non-exhaust emissions and the impact that that has on the climate. So I'm wondering what sort of proposals you're thinking of, because just in doing the research over the last week or so, I've been reading that NEEs are actually, the impact is 1,000 times worse than exhaust emissions, specifically the emissions from tire wear. That's also something that's related to brake wear. And that's where the majority of particulate matter from road transport comes from, NEEs. 60% of PM 2.5 and 73% of PM 10. And I can give you that information. I'm happy to pass that along. That was done by the UK government's air quality expert group. And so that's some sobering information there that I think, as we're talking about reducing emissions, if we're serious about it, we also need to look at the non-exhaust emissions and the sources for that and how we can reduce that. So I'm hoping that you're also looking at those types of things and not just the exhaust emissions.
Thanks for those comments. You know, the non-exhaust emissions, I think that's something that our inventory folks do focus on. So it is on the radar. It's not something that I generally think about, so I appreciate that comment and putting it there, you know, for us to consider when we look at all of these strategies.
Amy Goldsmith, you can unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment.
Yes, thank you. I'm Amy Goldsmith. I'm the State Director for Clean Water Action, and I am the chair of the Coalition for Healthy Ports. We've worked with PEG and others, and the Port Authority, Charles, hi, on a variety of issues around diesel reductions and getting cleaner air. Couple of things that I wanted to bring up, and partly from conversations with the Port Authority, is that, you know, there is no, mandatory requirements. The work that's being done has been voluntary, at the thoughtfulness of the terminal operators or in coordination with the Port Authority. But, time and time again, Sam Ruda and Beth Ann Rooney, the director and deputy director of the port, have indicated will regulate us so that we can actually get to the reductions that we want. And so I feel that it's, and because they've said it and said it publicly many times, that any way that we can, get to the mandatory reductions through, a mandated program, even if it's a phased in program and matched with some carrots and some, incentives and some funding and some sticks, and real timelines and benchmarks, is the only way that we're going to get to where we need to go and do it thoughtfully. So one, I would, urge the department to move towards, a mandate that's very clear and that everybody knows where we need to go. And I think in doing that, in part, it will move the technologies and the costs down, as we have seen just in the last 5 years. The number of vehicles and equipment that are available, keep improving, and California, is sort of the testing ground for them, so we can benefit from that and not be the guinea pigs for the new equipment, but let somebody else try them out. So I think that's all good. So that's one point I wanted to make. And also, I guess in line with that is, while the Port Authority has tried to use its tariff agreement as a mechanism on the drayage trucks, it also had the, to phase out the pre-2007. It did choose to change that tariff agreement because it wanted to and because it couldn't meet the goals. And so again, I think it's important that the DEP have a mechanism to force, mandate, regulate, whatever terms that you want to use, to use all the tools in the toolbox to get where we want to go. As I'm sure some of you read, another piece of Greenland has just, fallen off, into the ocean, 4 feet of, ice. So, we're not messing around here. We really need to do some things when the technologies are available and we can move them along. The other is that I haven't really heard any mention of, and I don't know where this fits, whether it's under the dredge section or under cargo handling. I'm not really quite sure, but it's the refrigerator units, often called reefers. The reefers are the cargo, the containers, but there's these diesel powered units that the Port Authority and the terminal operators do plug these units, the containers, in now, which is great, and I applaud them for doing that. But I do know that the longshoremen and women have to handle these units once they get onto the tractor, the tractors, and then the containers are moved over to the rail yard or somewhere else within the port. And workers have complained about how sick they get from them because they really have no regulations on them, and they're sort of the dirtiest of the dirty. And so I don't know where it fits, but these generators or power units need to be included in here. And then I guess the last point I'd like to make at this point is that we know that the port, when Hurricane Sandy happened, we know that the port was closed down. It was flooded in some areas. We at the Coalition for Healthy Ports have, while we would like to see, shore power for the ships, which is the next conversation, I guess. But if we're going to be charging, whether it's trucks, equipment, or other things, we would suggest that not everything be stationary, that the charging units And there are some charging units that exist, Motive and I think some others might have them, where the charging units can be moved out of harm's way, because we know the port and the airport are going to get flooded again. And we don't want to lose all the investment that's been made. And it's going to be a substantial investment, as Charles said, you know, concerns about brownouts and power outages, and then you have to add the storms on top of that. So let's not lose the investment that we have. Let's be able to move the charging units and also be creative about how to use some of the units, the charging that we do in the equipment, you know, as storage, you know, as needed, because we are going to be faced with climate resiliency and power issues. And so we should integrate some of that thinking into how we set up the move towards electrification. So I just want to raise those issues.
Thanks, Amy. I think you bring up a lot of good points. I think when we are looking to go to electrification, there's a lot of factors that we need to consider. And this is the time to have that conversation now before we start doing that installation of the infrastructure, you know, to have a good thought out conversation on what's the best way to move forward. So a lot of good points there. As far as refrigerated units, that's something that has been a focus of mine for a little bit now. So we really need to decide what's the best way to move forward with that. You know, we do apply for a lot of federal funding for voluntary programs. And one of the programs is for refrigerated units. We know that there's a lot of unnecessary idling that happens within that space. So while there's a lot to do, you know, we need to bin some of the different sectors and see what is the best way to approach that sector. But I just wanted to let you know that refrigerated units, that is on our radar, and we are trying to do something about that.
Thank you.
Melissa, I don't see any more hands raised, and I don't see any comments in, oh, wait, Michael DiVirgilio, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, so I had my hand raised before, but again, thank you. So let me give you a statement from us. I'll tell you who I am and what we do here. So I'm Mike DiVirgilio. I am a consultant to the Port of New York and New Jersey Sustainable Services Agreement. The Sustainable Services Agreement is an agreement of the Marine Terminal Conference Agreement approved by the Federal Maritime Commission. Its members are doing business here in the Port of New York and New Jersey, and the purpose of the agreement is to allow its members to meet, discuss, and agree on matters that relate to promoting environmentally sensitive, efficient, and secure marine terminal operations in the port. The agreement became effective in 2007, and its members are the 6 container terminal operators in the port, namely APM, GCT Bayonne, which is a global container terminals Bayonne, Global Container Terminals New York, MAR Terminals, Port Newark Container Terminal, and Red Hook Container Terminal. Those are the members of the agreement. And as you know, from its inception, the Sustainable Services Agreement and myself, along with the New York Shipping Association, have been assisting the Port Authority and the members of the Clean Air Strategy Group from the inception of that agreement in trying to implement programs and enforcing things like the Clean Truck Program here in the Port of New York through its RFID program. So, like others have said on the call, we also received notice of this just barely 2 days ago. So we weren't prepared to really give this deep thought for today. But I'd like to give some comments and make some statements as we can at this point in time. First, we want to be actively engaged and thank the department for its process in promulgating what we hope will be an effective or practical, effective regulations to address carbon dioxide and short-lived climate pollutants. In doing so, and as your efforts look to port operations, we remind you that the department points to the transportation sector as the largest single source of climate pollution in the state of New Jersey. But the port industry is a very small contributor to the 42% share that you allocated in the data that you presented previously. So I want to point that out. In addition, we do caution the department on the hasty and overbroad adoption of any of the California initiatives as they pertain to cargo handling equipment. The air quality issues present in California in general, and particularly in the Los Angeles harbor, are vastly different than the issues here in the port. We can certainly learn from what the West Coast has done, but we'd also want to point out that the CARB regulations took over 10 years to devise a strategy that could be implemented as a regulation going forward. So we are concerned about the promulgations of regulations without an appropriate analysis of the viability of medium and heavy duty vehicle zero emission programs here in the Port of New York, New Jersey. And while zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles could have a certain impact on regional air emissions, terminal operators here in the port have implemented technology platforms to reduce unnecessary emissions by reducing terminal visits by truckers, reducing idling time. Fully deploying zero emissions equipment will take many years and require a considerable financial investment on the part of the state of New Jersey. Moreover, at this time, local utility companies cannot provide reliable and cost-effective electrical infrastructure to support the mass deployment of zero emissions cargo handling equipment at the facilities. So marine terminal operators have participated in pilot programs focused on electrifying container handling equipment already, and we would like to provide information about the results of those programs to the department as we move forward. Terminal operators in the port have also received and are seeking grant funds to enable electric cargo handling equipment pilot programs, as I think been mentioned previously. It is important to note that the cargo handling equipment is also a niche market, and this equipment is quite expensive with a very limited source of suppliers. Notwithstanding the department's focus on equipment, the terminal operators in the port are also focused on enhancing supply chain efficiencies through information technology platforms designed to streamline cargo and equipment interchange, which result in more immediate impact on air quality in the port. So again, we thank you for this time to allow us to make our presentation, and we look forward to more discussions with the department on how resources, technology, and infrastructure capabilities, as well as any limitations, can be appropriately assessed before any regulations are put in place. So thank you for that time, and any questions or comments by others are welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike, for your comments. There's a lot for us to consider when we look at the California regulations. And again, how do we move forward to electrification? It's not a conversation just here at DEP. It has to be with our stakeholders and our sister agencies. So I don't think I see any other hand.
I don't have the ability to put a hand up for some reason. Jeff Tittle from Sierra Club. I could not get on the video, and when you have Apple equipment, you can't do a hand up anyway. Anyway, I just wanted to make a comment that what's missing from here and what was missing last week too is the reduction of vehicle miles traveled. That one of the problems we have, whether we have electric vehicles or vehicles we have now, is that they're traveling further, stuck in traffic longer, and the state of New Jersey really needs to develop a comprehensive program to reduce VMTs, whether it's through trip reduction programs for commuters, or more importantly for things like trucks, when we do off-peak pricing, or you do congestion pricing to try to deal with the trucks not jamming up the roads. When Matrix opened their development in Robbinsville a few years ago, 800 trucks hit that exit at one time when they opened. There was no planning. It caused a 6-hour backup on the highway. We also need to be looking at truck routes and getting them away from schools and the middle of communities as well, so that we can get trucks, when we get trucks, so we're not jamming up and polluting neighborhoods. But I think developing a strategy with the Port Authority, New Jersey Turnpike, and DOT for trip reduction for trucks and heavy vehicles is just as important as trying to electrify the system. Thank you.
Thanks for that comment. And is there anybody else that has comments? Any experiences with any hybrid technology or electric technology other than infrastructure? Are there any other barriers that you see, whether it's on the cargo handling side or ground support equipment?
Jane, go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comment or ask your question.
Hi, I'm back again. My question is not related to the information that Melissa is seeking right now. It goes back to the request for an extension. Since we're a government agency, it's going to take, we have a lot of hoops to go through to issue public comments. So, even if I could draft this tomorrow, I don't know that I could turn it around because of the multiple layers of review. Just wanted to make sure I got that out there. And when do you think you could get back to us on these multiple requests for an extension?
Jane, this is Peg Hannah. I already have a request into management to extend the comment period. So we will send out an email within a couple days, letting everyone know if we have approval to extend.
Thank you.
Of course.
Amy, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question or make your statement.
Amy, you're muted.
It sounds like, and just following up on what Jane said, is that there's, a group, a bunch of people. I'm not sure in what sectors, but clearly with the Port Authority, but who would actively engage not just in this, part of the stakeholder process, but the drayage and other things where they got such late notice that maybe just even moving, because I know the other date is the 24th or 25th for last week's. Maybe moving everything just 1 week, shifting everything, or making a later date for no matter what the stakeholder meeting was for, might give the needed relief, not just to the people who came late, but because these stakeholder meetings are like one on top of another, and they're all different sectors, it is a little challenging. So.
Yeah, I agree, Amy. This is Peg. We had a window of opportunity open to us to expand NJPACT, and we tried to take advantage of that. But it's sort of a double-edged sword because, by talking about some potentially great strategies, we're also overwhelming everyone, including ourselves, with a lot of with a lot of information and a lot of work. So I totally get it. And we're going to do what we can to try to move forward thoughtfully on only those strategies that we feel.
Peg, you cut out, but I appreciate trying to be thoughtful, but also, you know, we've waited a long time for these rules, so we don't want it to like, don't extend it a month, you know, like maybe a week, you know, because this is really, you know, this is really important. And, you know, we've had other meetings for years talking about this, so we certainly don't want to, you know, delay a lot, but maybe a week would be helpful. Especially in light of the holidays that are coming up. There are a lot of people who, you know, will not be at their desk working for quite a number of days for observation of Jewish holidays.
Thanks, Amy. Like Peg mentioned, once we get word on whether we can extend, we will notify everybody of the additional time.
Melissa, this is Ken Ratzman. Just we've kind of made general statements in the past with other stakeholder meetings. We're going to shoot for a public comment, or not a public comment, a response within the time frame we're looking for. We're not going to ignore comments, even if they're a couple days late or even a week late. We are going to take some time to get all these comments together and thoughts processed. So we're going to get the ball rolling, but understand we have very short deadlines we're trying to meet, getting a rule proposal out in early spring. So by all means, we do hear you, and we will go back to see if there's an official extension. But even if it's not official, we're going to be accepting comments until we're done writing the documents. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. And with everything else, we are always open for comments or additional dialogue. You know, if some of these rules don't move forward, there's always other things that we can do or consider, or just getting the education on specific sectors, for me, I think is really important. So we understand what's happening out there. We understand how each sector works, what the turnover is in e-equipment. So just keeping that open dialogue so we understand the nature of everybody's business, that really does help us on many fronts.
Okay, I don't see any more hands raised, and I don't see any questions in the chat box. Is there anyone else that wants to make a comment or ask a question?
Okay, I guess we're going to give you some extra time back to your morning. So we will reconvene this afternoon at 1 o'clock, where we'll discuss ocean-going vessels and hovercraft. Again, just like this morning's session, we'll do a presentation. We'll discuss, you know, some of the CARB regulations, things that we're considering. And again, we're looking for feedback in this space as well, as this is a new area for us. So please come back and join us at 1 o'clock. I want to note that there is a different link to the Teams meeting. And we'll give you back an extra hour of your morning. So we'll talk to you at 1 o'clock. And thanks for joining us this morning.